Okay guys, so in this video, we are going to revisit this data set that I drew a couple of videos ago. And we are going to use this to explore the idea of frequency. Now, when we talk about frequency in the context of mathematics, all we mean is the frequency is how often something happens statistically, right? So I'm actually going to just write this down. So frequency is how often, in the context of this, if we look at these numbers as scores, we will say how often a score happens. How often a score happens. All right. Now that we've defined this, we are going to look at a couple of data plots which really nicely represent this idea of frequency. And as I said before in the previous video, I believe that these are a cleaner way of representing the data and compared to, say, stem and leaf plots or scatter plots. But actually, scatter plots aren't too bad. But I really like these frequency plots. So the first one we're going to look at is one called the dot plot. So I'm going to take this data here and I will actually just to make life a little bit easier, I'm going to just rub out one row because it'll be quite time consuming to sort of draw all these out. And let me change a couple of these numbers. So let's go 12 here. Let's make this a 12. Sorry for switching up on you on the fly a little bit, but it'll just be easier to draw my dot plot here. So let's go, and you may realize that I've added some kind of doubling up numbers, which we'll see why in terms of the frequency here, in terms of this dot plot. Okay, now I've written down this frequency definition as how often a score happens. And what I might do is just move this down a little bit. And I will draw my dot plot up here. So all my dot plot is doing is just taking, essentially, like all other data plots, representing the data I have here. So I'm going to draw, like I did before, one axis here. And this axis is going to represent my scores. So I'm going to note down all of the scores from this particular test. So let me go. So my lowest is 3. Then my next one is 5. And it may have already jumped out at you that I've only drawn my 3 once, even though it occurs 3 times. And that's good that you're thinking ahead, because it will be significant later on. So we have a 6 here. We have the next highest is a 9. We have 3 12s. We have a 13. We have 2 15s. We have a 17, and we have an 18, or 2 18s. Cool. All right. Now that we have this all written out, we are going to just almost tally up how many times each of these scores occur. And that is the crux of a frequency data plot, showing how often something happens. Now, we have 3 3s, and I'm just going to draw dots, almost as a tally for each of our scores. We have 1 5. I'm going to mark these off as I go because I made the mistake of not doing that before. We have a 5 and a 6. We have a 9 and 3 12s. 9, 3 12s. We have a 13. We add a 10 in here. Okay. Let's disregard this one for now. I know that's a bit of a cop-out, but it's not really the point. We're just developing the skill here of drawing up our data points. So if you had the 10 in yours, feel free to draw it in, but just to save time so I don't have to change my entire axis down here, I'm just going to pretend it didn't exist in the first place and move on. So we have 2 15s, 1, 2, 17, and 2 18s. Cool. So this dot plot, which I forgot to actually write it as a heading, but this is my dot plot. And this essentially shows all of my scores, and in this direction, up here, it shows my frequency, doesn't it? So these dot plots are a very nice way of, we can use this to first, we'll identify, which number happens the most? Well, 3 happens 3 times, 12 happens 3 times. So these are the most occurring numbers, and you'll see why in future videos why that's important. But I can also see, well, all of these scores only happen once, so these are the uncommon ones. We have a couple of 2s here, and we have our most common scores. So those are dot plots, and I'm going to draw one more. Well, it's like a 2-in-1 type of plot, and I will actually zoom out and move along here. And the type of plot I'm going to look at on this right-hand side is going to be what we call a frequency histogram. And another one we're going to look at is going to be a frequency polygon. So I'm going to write here, so our frequency histogram / polygon. Now, I'm going to do the exact same thing with the things I've done with my dot plot. But like I did with scatter plots, I'm going to draw this on a set of axes here. So I'm going to write my frequency up here. I'm just going to call this F. And I'm going to do my score down here. Now that we learned our sort of graphing techniques in the previous video, that'll help us to construct our polygon. But we're going to work with the histogram first. I'm going to color code this. So I'm going to do my histogram in blue and my polygon in green. So I've got my blue for my histogram. And I'm once again just going to label my axis here. So I have 3, 5. I don't think I have enough space. 6, but we'll see how we go. 9, 12, 13, 15, 17, and we'll do 18 here. My God, my handwriting is so shocking. Apologies to the viewer. I hope you get used to it or I get better. There's only the two options that can come out of this. And these are all of my scores. And from my frequency, I'm just going to label on my vertical axis, or what are the different possibilities from my data for how many times things have happened. So I'll see that here things could have occurred 1 time, 2 times, or a maximum of 3 times, just from the data set I was given to begin with. Now, these histograms are very similar to our dot plots, and we're going to be making a type of bar graph. So I'm going to work through. In blue, I'm going to draw my histogram. So on each side of my score here, I'm going to just draw a bar going up to whatever the graph's frequency is. So my score of 3 happened 3 times. My score of 5 happened 1 time. Same with my score of 6 and 9. They both happened once. My 12 happened 3 times. My 13 happened once. My 15 happened twice. My 17 happened once. And my 18 happened twice. So let's actually zoom in on this now that I really just had to look at the data there. But looking at our frequency histogram and polygon, hope you can see that okay. But I've visually represented, in the same way as the dot plot, all of my data, just graphically. So you can see with these visual frequency tables, it takes a lot of the work out of something that a stem and leaf plot needed to take into account, right? Because with a stem and leaf plot, we had to include these recurring numbers. So in our previous stem and leaf, our 3 happened 3 times. So we physically had to write the 3. Yes, the table looked a lot cleaner, but now we can just say, well, now that we understand what graphs are and what these axes show, they show 2 different things, we can say, well, I can just easily write all my scores just once down the bottom. And for any double ups, I can include a frequency axis, which is going to tell me how much or how many times each score occurs. And that's really useful. That's a lot easier now to look at. This and the dot plot are both like way easier ways as humans of interpreting data, because now the data is visual. It's not just these set of numbers. And you can imagine that when we deal with bigger data sets, the one I had was less than 30, I think. But if you're going into hundreds, if you're going into thousands, you're going to need some type of visual means, a visual way to show the data, because it's a lot more pleasing to look at, and we can extract information way easier doing this. Now, all my frequency polygon is, now we've drawn our histogram, all my polygon does is it takes a score and the frequency as a coordinate, like the scatter plot did. So it said that, for example, my 3 happened 3 times. My score of 3 happened 3 times. So I can just draw my my score of 3 with a frequency of 3 as a point, as a coordinate on a map, right? And thankfully, because I've already drawn the histogram, and a lot of these times these two graphs get paired together, because I've drawn the histogram, you'll notice that this falls kind of in the middle of the top of my bar on the histogram. And the same thing here. My score of 5 happens one time. So it's going to fall right in the middle. Same with this one. Same with this one. And feel free to pause the video and have a go yourself. But I can now plot all of my scores and their resulting frequency here. And the reason we call this a polygon is because you may remember from my geometry series that polygons are just shapes with straight lines of any number of sides. So I can connect all these dots, sort of like those connect the dots drawings you used to do when you're a kid. Maybe some of you may remember those. But we can draw and connect all of our points here. And this can go back here. And we see that we make a type of shape. We make like a polygon with the axes. So that's just a little nugget of information. That's why we call it a frequency polygon. But hopefully from this video, you can see some of the benefits of representing data visually and why this idea of frequency is so powerful. Because it allows us to just draw out all our scores. And instead of just repeating stuff, we can just say, well, this score has a certain frequency. Boom, draw a histogram or a dot plot or a frequency polygon. There's these 3 new tools that we have which take into account how often these scores happen in a statistical context. So I hope this video helped. These are all of the basic kind of data plots we'll be looking at in this course. And when we go into looking or calculating these different elements of our data, so our means, our medians, which I've talked about in our introductory video, once we know how to draw these, which I've shown in this video, since we know what we're looking for now and we know what each one represents, we can extract a lot of data out of these. And we can learn a lot about the data set because it's drawn in a much more kind of viewer-friendly way. So we'll be going into this idea a lot more in future videos. So I'll see you there.